Excellent. All right, so welcome to the Radnor Township School District Finance Committee meeting. This is March 28th. Our meeting was pushed back as a result of some other events that were going on, and to make room for us to have a discussion time with our Citizens Advisory Committee. So, getting started on that, are there any introductions or administrative remarks?
I don't have any, thank you.
Okay, great. Then, is there any public comment?
Miss, is there a book back there? Cindy Spurtle, 106 Valley Forge Terrace, Wayne. Sorry, I'm so used to the other room. Good evening.
Hello.
A few questions for tonight's finance meeting.
Okay.
And based on the minutes from last week, and a lot of questions were answered by Ms. Deco on board docs, the questions that were asked. And one question that was brought up is whether they will track via cookies, and that was one question that wasn't answered during the meeting in last month's committee meeting. Another question I have maybe is one I could ask later on, but concerning the bleachers, since this is finance, they had not yet received at facilities the answer to the question on the safety of the bleachers. And I was wondering if that had been received. It was due in any day. And the last question on the minutes were the committee requested the committee, last in January, the committee requested if the number of days on the charts that we're receiving for substitutes could be converted to number of people. And I looked at the charts included today, and I don't believe that has yet to be changed. Just a few quick questions. I see that I'm happy to see the CAC. Are we going to call them SAC for the Soft C and Citizens, or CAC? Very interesting memorandum from them. I have just one quick question, and I'm looking forward to the explanation, and that is the student fee that is charged to the ninth graders at $45. How was that originally determined? It obviously did not cover the costs of the iPad, so that was my one question on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Good evening, Roberta Winters, 326 Williams Road. I'm really pleased, as the woman before me said, Ms. Spurtle said, that we have the CAC here this evening. I think we can really benefit from those people with specific expertise as we continue to look at our budgetary matters. And I just would like to reinforce the need that as we have volunteers and making decisions regarding our expenditures, that we make sure there is no conflict of interest in decisions that they bring forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. No other public comment? Then approval of the minutes. Anybody have any concerns about the notes from the February meeting?
I wasn't here, so I'm not going to weigh in on them.
Fair enough. I didn't have any issues. Okay, great. Then let's move to agenda item number 1. Michelle, would you like to do the intro?
I would. As you know, we have a Citizen Advisory Committee. I had the honor of working with that committee over the last several months. We've had numerous meetings, and 2 of the people from the committee are here this evening to present.
Thank you very much.
So I will turn it over to them. It's Gail Morrison and Bill. Bill, I hope I don't mispronounce your name. Your last name? Siddons. So welcome, and
thank you.
I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. I really didn't have planned out a presentation per se. I think we just I wanted to come, thank you. I'm sure you all have read the memorandum we prepared together. We met 3 times with staff. I wanted to start out and say we were thrilled to get going. Michelle has been wonderful. We started out with a real goal to be lean and efficient and focused, and we've kept reminding each other we're just here to do what the Finance Committee asks us to do. We don't want things to grow into larger resource hog projects when that's not necessary. That's part of how this iPad lease versus purchase discussion came down, that we said, when's the next lease or purchase that would be made? And Michelle pointed out this July. So then we tried to back out a timeline that made sure we had a recommendation. It was before a committee, and then when you guys need another month to pass it, usually a month maybe, to pass it to the full board, and that staff can get going on it before the summer with people leaving and things not happening at the same pace they do. So I think it was one important thing that Ken Batchelor pointed out last week at curriculum when this was sort of previewed, because Maureen McQuiggan has got to work on it, is that we don't lease the iPads like you lease a car. They're also purchased. It's just the way you pay for them. You know, purchase at once or pay over 3 years, and then you own them, right? So do you have questions?
So I just think in terms of viewer participation, or at least trying to follow along, I'm not sure that they've seen the memorandum, so can we just maybe step through it a little bit?
Sure.
And maybe if we can back up, and I probably should have done that more as an introductory type thing. So the Citizens Advisory Committee was something that our committee, the Finance Committee, had decided, and we kind of churned about for, 9 months, about whether we were going to be able to formulate a group. And we decided that we were able to do that within our current policies, that this ad hoc committee could be something that would be created of citizens. We established who it would be. We went out to the public. We invited people to participate. We selected a group of people, and we identified a couple of, with the support and the input from the administration, a couple of little projects for the group to get started on, with the whole idea, I think you mentioned it, but just for clarity, the whole idea that those recommendations would come back to us as a committee, that we would churn through them, ask whatever questions or whatever, and if we felt that there was something there of value, that we would recommend that up forward to the whole board for consideration and discussion. So I just want to make sure and outline kind of what the parameters were. So this, as you mentioned, the lease purchase discussion was something that made sense from a timeline point of view, and you guys kind of dove into it. So I don't know if you have the memorandum in front of you, or if you probably already know it by heart anyhow, but if you kind of want to just step through just overall what you guys were looking at, what your findings were, what your thoughts were, et cetera, that you've outlined in the memorandum.
There we are. I will. So we met for 2 hours each on January 23rd and February 2nd. That's when we started to ask the open-ended, a little bit probing questions. And then Michelle was great in gathering up resources internally and getting us the total district iPad inventory, copies of the lease agreements today. Some background on, for instance, they had tried a program of buying back the iPads from the seniors, or was that selling them to the seniors as they left? And evidently it wasn't very successful. That weighed in to our discussion. The second meeting is when Mr. McCook came, and a lot of this was somewhat new to him because Joan Cassano really ran this program before. So he caught up 6 months before he had to help us and is still working through some of those things. And what I want to mention, too, is the context of this decision on whether to spend another $350,000 some dollars on the iPads was the budget picture right now, and the budget shortfall, and the need to find savings, and it being a limited pie. And when you save money on something like hardware, you can redeploy it to things like teacher training and small class sizes and all the things we love. So I did put that in the memo. Let's see. So you can read here, fourth paragraph, the district has purchased or leased 2,094 Apple iPads for the RHS one-to-one iPad program at a cost of approximately $1.22 million, or $583 per device. The first year they bought the iPads, and then in subsequent years they went on the 3-year lease. I mean, I guess to space out the payments. In total, the district has purchased or leased 2,813. That difference of I didn't do the math, 813 minus 94, 700 some iPads are staff iPads. And we did learn in the course of this that when you see a teacher that's writing to you from an iPad, they earned that when they did some professional development. They also have district-issued laptops, correct? So we
Participation where they were able to earn the iPad.
Correct.
Yep.
Act 48 is their continuing ed, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So let's see. We did not have total expenditure for the district-wide 2,813 iPads, but we sort of extrapolated from the program costs, the RHS one-to-one program costs, and the district has spent over $1.6 million on iPad hardware alone. You'll see in some of the inventory and more detailed discussion that, as we saw last week, a curriculum, then Maureen McQuiggan and Byron, they have to equip the iPads with the apps the kids use. Many of them are free, but so this July 2017 lease commitment would be an additional 440 devices at a cost of $305,000 or $693 per device. I guess because those are iPad Air 2. Yeah, the devices got a little bit more expensive. And that's because I remember Joan Cassano just describing to me when the freshmen sign up, get oriented, they pay their fee, they buy the optional insurance or not, and then there's an assembly and they get to peel the wrapper off their brand new iPad. So that will come into context a little bit later.
So I have a couple of questions. One
Sure.
is that, we're saying the same thing. We're not really ever leasing. It's just whether or not we're paying for them upfront or
Yeah, that's the thing.
Or it's a-
We're
or
just
it's-
finance. It's just
or we're just financing them over 3 years.
Right, but
So-
so that cost still, I guess, prompted this examination
No,
of.
we're just saying that, when you lease a car, it's like you said earlier, it's like when you lease a car, you give it back after a couple of years,
Right,
You're only,
yeah.
you're only paying for 50% of it, but with the leasing here, we're buying it at the end.
Yeah, it's a
So
buy.
we're just financing
It's a
it.
buy.
Straight buy.
We're basically just financing.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
After
So
leasing
that's
is
one.
a
Yeah, it's just that we're
financing
just
method.
clarifying the terminology.
That was one question I had.
Okay.
The other question I had, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
Yeah, was that, so I understand the recommendation, given that the district is evaluating on its own whether or not they want to move to a different instructional technology. But do we have any sense of what a comparable cost for Chromebooks or a Micro Surface? So I think a Micro Surface 2-in-1 tablet, is that
Microsoft
Is that
Surface.
experientially any different from an iPad? I thought it was all touch technology. I mean, some of the things you're saying here, but...
2-in-1 would be a laptop and a tablet in one.
Okay, and then we don't know what the new Microsoft Windows device is going to be. And a Chromebook is a
Byron
computer, or is it just an iPad, but that it has the feel of a keyboard? I don't know what a Chromebook is.
Chromebook is a laptop.
And let me jump in here, too. Just,
Okay.
the administration in meeting, and when Byron met with the group, and myself and Michelle is also, we're talking with the Citizen Advisory, we also realized from an educational standpoint, and we discussed this at curriculum, that it's time for us to look at this program from an educational and a financial aspect as well.
Yes.
We haven't evaluated. So the questions that you're asking about, these different technologies, those will be part of that evaluation. What are the other technologies that are out there? What are the things that are there? And the only reason I'm jumping in to answer that now is there are people, I've already ran into some teachers who said, oh, I heard we're getting rid of the iPads, we're moving to Chromebooks. No, we want to evaluate. We want to evaluate both from an educational and a financial standpoint our current program in the reality of what we're looking at from a financial aspect, but also, most importantly, educationally, what has been the impact of the iPads with our students? How has it been going from an educational standpoint? And then in that discussion during the year will be what are those other technologies? Because when we started this program 6 years ago, I think it's fair to say that Apple kind of cornered the market on a lot of the technology. There's a lot of different technology out there, and I think that's what the Citizens Advisory was acknowledging as well, that there's a lot of other technology out there that we might want to look at.
One of our
Right.
members is Melissa Butler, who's a district parent and Maureen McQuiggan's counterpart at Springfield School District. So they have used Chromebooks there, and she was effusive at how successful it's been. So that was valuable input to me, too.
So just trying to, because we kind of could we allow, I'm trying to understand, if I'm trying to watch this from home and I don't have this memorandum in front of me, they have no idea what the heck we're talking about. So
Right.
if we could just finish going through kind of the thought process behind this, then we can get to the recommendation, then we can talk about what the next steps are. If you've got a question, though, pertaining to the stuff we already heard, then let's do that question. But otherwise, if we could just quickly finish through what
Yeah,
the
no,
president...
that was my.
Oh, okay,
That
cool.
was my question. Other people jumped in with other stuff.
All right, perfect, thank you. Okay, so
Okay. Right.
can we, Paul, let's continue kind of quickly through what it is that you guys looked at in terms of the overall, and then we can get to what the recommendation is and why.
Okay. So in those, I'm on page 2 now, and I talk a little bit about the input from Dr. McCook at our February 2 meeting, and then how it came up that there are, geez, given this expense, there are other options. They are Android-based tablets, as people probably know, are significantly cheaper. You can probably get one for $100. But and as you see here, so the Chromebooks, Microsoft Surface 2 and 1, whatever the team together looks at for the instructional technology. But you see, items 1 through 7 here are what we picked up as good reasons to evaluate this cost and review this program. The iPad doesn't give the kids full keyboard functionality, and that means that they cannot do computer-based testing on them. So they still have to maintain computer labs. So again, we found an instance of some duplicative spend, I would call it. And as we talk about here, that the apps that the students have gotten used to, Schoology is web browser based, so you can do it on any device you want. But some of the apps the kids have gotten used to, like Notability, or the teachers use Nearpod to screen up, put what's on each student's iPad up to the smartboards in front of them. Those are all app-based, and there's Android counterparts. And then within the discussion, you'll remember it happened a little bit quickly at the end of last year that the middle school bought the Amplify Science program. That's device-based. It's electronic. And that was natively written for Android. So Byron had to do a fair amount of work making it work on the school district's iPads. So it was not as though moving to Chromebooks for the middle school would be a good thing, too.
So it's not an anchor, whether we move forward
an
either way,
anchor.
it's not an anchor one way or the other, okay?
He talked about I think Byron there's been some appeal to what the high school tried to implement this year, the geofencing capability, so that students were using their iPads appropriately in school, the gaming, the texting, this kind of thing. And he said to us, the minute they turn off the location-based services on the iPads, there's no more geofencing. So that factored in, and he went into, these iPads are not enterprise class from his perspective in terms of managing them where they are, managing when they update, and some of that middle office capability, I think you call it. And point number 6, I went into a little bit earlier on the staff having to give them laptops and then the purchase of the iPads. So, and that's 2 different things for the teachers to manage as well, as some things they can do on one and some on the other, but not both. And then number 7, peer district stars forego one-to-one instructional technology or use Chromebooks with as much or greater academic success and user satisfaction. And the first time I laid out on Ken Batchelor here in person, he came to the meeting and I asked him to talk a little bit about Unionville Chadds Ford and what was their approach. And he said, we don't have them in the high school. They're just starting, right? They're in the middle school and may filter up. But what was important to me is he said, I've had to remind people in the past that you're not going to increase test scores with new iPads. So the academic achievement component, you're not buying more learning when you buy more iPads, or if you spend twice as much, you don't get better academic outcomes. So, given that, we thought, well, we could look at this from a functional standpoint with efficiency of the dollar spent. So we are recommending that the Radnor Township School District forego the purchase or lease of new iPads for the upcoming 17-18 school year and reuse the current class of 2017's iPads. So this, in May, June, they'll be returning their iPads to the school. They'll be, checked, refurbished. Probably they have we learned the apps that are on them have to be repurchased because Apple has a kind of like software key within it, so another user can't use it. It's tied to their username or something. So those are owned. They would be going to the incoming class of 2021, and that gives Dr. McCook and Michelle the educational, the financial review component a year to spend some time evaluating. And Maureen actually told us at the very first meeting that we've got our hands on a couple of Chromebooks, she said to us, and we're seeing how they work and what we might be able to do with them. So, I'll go over back to Melissa Butler couldn't be here today because she had a work conflict meeting. She's the person I mentioned earlier that's in Maureen McQuiggan's role. But she's a good example of a valuable resource for you, a valuable reality check on what they've spent and how it's gone for them. And something we talked about, Mr. Sidness and his son are both on the committee. They both work in IT supply, IT procurement. But if this committee gets the chance to look at other reviews you ask us to do, we can bring in other citizen resources, like we talked about the bleachers at the high school, and we could have somebody with construction expertise sit on the committee for 3 months as we look at that process. So I thought that was a little bit important to mention, that it was nice that this was set up with some true expertise in what we were going to look at, and it's an opportunity to do that some more. So
maybe we could pause, and I could maybe toss it over either to Dr. McCook or back this direction in terms of what's the administration's thought about the next steps, and or whether this, like where and how the Citizens Advisory or this committee would be able to contribute.
No, I think this has been, and thank you, Gail, and thank you to the Citizens Advisory Committee, and I think this has been a very good timing. I think the work of the committee has been really helpful with their recommendation coming forward at the same time as our technology department and our administration is saying this is an issue that we need to look at as well from an educational standpoint. As I mentioned before, it's kind of the coming together of the need to look at it both from a financial and educational standpoint is important. My comment, that I'd shared with you about technology and test scores, I think districts like a Unionville, Chadsford, or districts like a Radnor school district, just because we put technology in the students' hands, I don't know that we're going to see test scores go up necessarily, because our test scores, in many ways, or as referring to Unionville or as referring here, are strong. Right. Are there places where our teachers will demonstrate that, maybe there's improved opportunities for writing, there's improved opportunities for activities, that the technology provides efficiencies, provides opportunities for students to be more organized, teachers to be more organized? Yes, I think there's a lot of areas that technology can do that as well. Any program that we have to evaluate it. And I think as a district, we have to become good at evaluating it, and we have to become good at letting people know that there isn't already an answer before we go into the evaluation. And that was the only reason I jumped in there before Susan, Mrs. Stern. I apologize. I just want people to realize that there isn't a decision. Yes, there's a lot of different technologies that are out there, and there's a lot of different technologies that are cheaper. Just recently, Apple has just reduced some of their prices with the iPad just recently, because it is a market. The market forces are driving all of these companies. But we first and foremost want to look at it from an educational standpoint and a financial standpoint. So we have shared with the curriculum committee a list of questions that we would like to study for the year, put together a committee. The committee will seek out parent input, teacher input, administrative input, student input as it goes forward. But we'd like the board to look at those questions. I believe they're in everyone's packet, and make sure the board is comfortable with these. This is the parameters of the study. These are the things we want to find out an answer to, so that when this committee and the administration ultimately, when the administration comes forward in the winter with a recommendation, so we're shooting maybe January, February time period with a recommendation, all of a sudden there isn't, oh, did you find out this, or we want to know this. We want to up front look at what are the things that we want to evaluate in this study, and then develop a recommendation moving forward. So over the next month or so, if board members could review those questions and then give feedback to Maureen, to Dr. McQuiggan, that would be wonderful.
And broader than just iPads.
Correct.
It's technology across the board and
Yes,
how
it
we're
is.
planning to use it going forward.
Yes, and it
Okay.
really is a K-12 study, but there is going to be a focus and a beginning point with the high school, because we are at a window, and this is where I think it was very helpful with the Citizens Advisory Group. They've noted that we're at a good opportunity with this lease purchase cycle that we're in. So what we're going to do for a year is we're going to take those iPads that are now with seniors and going to reuse those with the freshmen and give us an opportunity, buying ourselves. We're in a nice window this year to really study this before we lock into purchasing over 3 years, another set of iPads.
I've got a couple of nitty-gritty questions about the iPads. First of all, in terms of pricing, whatever this financing arrangement is, do you have a sense of what the implicit interest rate or financing cost associated with these units is?
It's very low, right around 2.2%, Byron?
Okay. And then what generation is the transferred machine as compared to what we would purchase if we were going brand new?
I'm going to ask Dr. McCook to address that.
Yeah, they are actually very, very similar. There's not much difference. Probably, it's the amount of memory. The ones that we use now have 64 gigabytes of memory. If we were going to buy new again, pretty much, with a whole new class set, we would probably go to the 128 because they don't make the 64s anymore. So everything is relative from year to year. They try to build on greater efficiencies with those models.
Right.
So they give you more memory for pretty much the same price that you paid for like 3-4 years ago.
But do we have an issue now with the current iPads and the memory capacity in terms of the way that they're used? No.
Not that I am aware of.
And not that I've seen on my daughters.
Not that I'm aware of.
But just kind of curious about.
64 just feels like it feels like a riches, because I had one back in the beginning. I think it was 16.
Well, but the thing, all it really matters is what do you need? What do you have to actually use versus what's available? And if we're not using it for anything, then okay, all right, cool.
Okay, that's helpful. So we're not handing them something that's really functionally obsolete, saying here, make do. Okay, that
Not at all.
was it. I think that was. I just need to be clear on that.
And
Do we have the numbers?
Yeah, and if I could, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, do we have the numbers? Is the senior class bigger than the incoming?
I did take a look at the numbers, and as a matter of fact, I have them right here.
Well, the senior class is the biggest class in the district,
Right.
so
We're
it's going to be
actually-
more.
We're actually, the senior class is 326 right now, and the incoming freshmen, if all things remaining equal today, would be 311. And we also have some in reserve as well, too, because we always keep some extra in the case of breakage. But one of the advantages that we're looking at is that these iPads that we're going to recycle for another year, they were only purchased 3 years ago. So we're actually going into the 4th year. Which would be the practice that we would have done anyway, moving forward if we were going to. And when you look at the juniors and the sophomores and the freshmen, they would have had this for 4 years anyway. So we're actually getting another year out of them before either selling them to students or selling them on the open market.
Right, because the seniors didn't get them, this senior class didn't get them until 10th grade.
Exactly,
So
that's right.
this is the last of the group who got it, I believe, as 10th graders.
Okay.
After that, it started to be ninth
the
graders.
current,
But I have a couple of
freshman,
questions.
sophomore,
So
junior.
does our current, what's the status of one-to-one iPads in the middle school? Do they have them?
It
I
went
can-
on hold, doesn't it?
Yes,
No,
Byron?
no, we don't have a one-to-one program at the middle school
Okay.
for all students. Only
All right.
just with the science curriculum. Every student who takes science is issued a shareable iPad that they're using.
Okay.
So they're shared between multiple students.
All righty, so then in terms of the
They
savings,
stay on the cart, they're in the class, they don't come home.
Exactly. They stay on the
Right,
cart.
okay.
They do not come home.
so in terms of the $300-odd thousand, we'd still have to invest, it looks about $40,000 for the new covers and the
covers and
new,
the apps.
the updated apps, right? As well as you're recommending that we forego the $45 student fee. I don't remember, I think it was for insurance of some sort. I don't know why we would forego that other than insurance for.
The insurance
it was-
is like an additional.
That was
It is.
additional to the
Right.
45.
Yeah, so you
Okay.
pay 90 if you get the insurance.
For me, so I understand that if the administration thinks that, holding off for a year because you're giving an overall look, you're right, the timing is very fortuitous. Of course, moving forward, for me, there's two-pronged concern in considering making a change, which is, if we were to make a change to a different platform, we're going to have two systems going on at the same time at the high school, theoretically, or we're going to have to suck it up and invest for 4 grades at the same time at the high school. And that's when you said things to consider. From a financial standpoint, it's, one or the other. I think there's value in kids understanding how to use, a Mac-based plan, but also a PC. I'm actually fairly amazed at how illiterate teenagers are about installing hardware. And I've installed RAM and new hard drives and all sorts of things on my PC that you can't do really on a Mac. It makes it, almost virtually impossible. So they don't learn how to do that. Now, I know the district would take care of that, but for them to even have an understanding of that kind of thing is just a different experience with regard to technology, the education of their technology, if they can't do anything to fix their own computer or anything like that. I appreciate the delve in.
I don't know that you would have to buy all new so that everybody was on the same platform, because from what I have seen, they already are device agnostic. They use their iPads when they need to pull something up quickly, but they get on a real computer with a real screen and a real keyboard when they need to type. And they can go on.
Right.
Almost all the boys have gaming laptops that they use anyway, and they're probably preferable for doing their homework on as well. So.
I will say I was incredibly impressed last Tuesday night at how many kids had their iPads open on the airplane home from the band trip, and kids were using Notability and doing
some work, yeah.
Oh, a lot of them. I mean, it was impressive, the number, and it fit nicely on the, that's not a reason to keep iPads, but the kids are utilizing them, and I don't know that they could have done that with computers, because they were able to use the Notability they were definitely using them for homework last
Got an 11-inch Dell, it works great.
Yeah, the Chromebooks are lightweight, and they keep a long charge and some of those things.
Okay, cool. So I think we're all in agreement.
I thought it might be worth saying just that Melissa Butler emphasized to all of us, she's like, please make sure that one of the most important things you're going to do with this is communicate it properly and communicate the timeline. Mm-hmm. So that you don't have,
fair enough.
What? I didn't hear about this. I don't want that.
Sure. Well, I think you've already been there. It sounds like you've already been there.
She works in admin. She knows.
Yeah, so no, I appreciate that. So first, yeah, right. So first, I wanted to say thank you very much for the group and for your first little, jaunt into doing a little project for us. Generally speaking, I just was interested to understand, how did the process work as a team? Were you guys able to gel together? Was there any kind of concerns expressed amongst the group in terms of working on little projects like this for us?
I think the biggest concern is we wanted to make sure that we addressed what you requested us to address. But when we took that step backwards, we said we'd be doing the board a disservice. We did not look at
A broader picture.
A broader picture, including what the instructional implications were. We knew that you could replace iPad with Android tablets at a dramatically lower cost.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just a replacement. What else do you want to do? What is your instructional goals and objectives? And we gel with that.
Bill,
You want to come up? Yeah.
You can be heard by.
Sorry.
Yeah, if you're at home, it's going to be like you're silent.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think we gelled very, very well. Like I said, we tried to expand it just a little bit, because when we looked at it, we said, is this an iPad question, or is this really an educational question? Mm-hmm. And we came to the conclusion that it was an educational question. And that's how we evolved to making the recommendation that we did, along with the staff. We had tremendous input from the staff, and, no more than the usual grumbling and disagreements, but that's normal when you're negotiating. So,
Sure.
And we had great input, so I thought it went very, very well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dan Webster is not here tonight. He's very, very helpful in these. He's sort of the numbers guy.
Okay.
Of people that
Of
like
your
numbers
group.
anyway.
And then from an administrative point of view, similar? Because part of our goal of establishing this group was to be sure it didn't become overly burdensome. that it was helpful, there was a value in it, and that it didn't become just an incremental burden on you?
I thought we worked really well together as a team, and we had a large variety of people that were on the CAC, who are still on the CAC, that had all different kinds of backgrounds that really made the task go very quickly and very efficiently. We would use our meeting time to talk about some of the things that we needed to look at in order to make a decision, and then my office staff and my staff would pull it together, and then we would send it out to the group electronically, so we had it before the next meeting, and we always scheduled another meeting before we all left. So I think it worked well. Obviously, we only had to have 2 meetings and then 1 planning meeting to talk about what we were going to present to the board. So I think that this group is anxious to get started on another task. And
that was my next question.
Do
we have?
We have actually, the CAC has identified some tasks that they would like to work on, but Mr. Batchelor and I were talking just before the meeting, and we've got some tasks that we think that they could work on that could be very beneficial. Given the fact that we're working on our budget, we may not be able to incorporate it into this budget year, but we should be able to incorporate it into next budget year. So I don't know if Ken wants to add anything else in regards to that.
No, I would just say I really appreciate the work of the group, and also I attended one of the meetings, and one of the things I appreciated was that the group kind of kept themselves in check as well. I mean, it's easy when you start to meet, as you mentioned at the beginning, and boy, how far do we go? Should we start looking in this? And, sometimes you lift up one rock, you realize you want to lift up 5 other rocks, and the group was very good at saying, no, this is our directive, here's what we need to look at. I would like to, over the next month or so, talk to the board about the next month or two, about what we would see as some possible options for the group in the future, and what the group could work on next. So that's something that we do want to have discussions about in the future.
Okay. Great. Well, then, thank you all very much for your time and your feedback on this one, and stay tuned, I guess, for other assignments.
Yeah, I think it's great. I really do appreciate the expertise coming forward. I mean, this is something that we've talked about. I've heard various people talk about over the years. Wouldn't it be nice if? And this is a really wonderful, concrete example of how nicely it provides an outlet for those who are interested and able to make a contribution, and how the district is able to benefit. So thank you all, you as the representatives, but the entire group. I appreciate that.
First time somebody get asked to say.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Really do appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. If there's nothing else then on agenda number 1, let's move to agenda number 2, item number 2, which is related to the 2017-18 budget update.
Last month, we talked about applying for Act 1 exceptions. The district has applied for the Act 1 exceptions and has been granted the 2 exceptions that we thought we would qualify for, special education and retirement. The total of those 2 exceptions is just under $688,000, and those exceptions are included in your packet this evening. At the meeting last month, Mr. Miller, I think you were the one that asked the question of why the retirement contributions were based on the salary base from 2011-2012, and I was able to find an answer to that question for you. In 2006, that's when Act 1 went into place, and from 2006 to 2010, PDE allowed you to have an exception based on your current salary. And what they determined was that school districts were increasing their staff, and then they were getting an exception for it. So back in, say, 2006, you might only have 142 people on your staff, but in 2007, you might have 150, and you were getting an exception for increasing your staff. So PDE made a change to how the retirement contribution, the Act 1 exception, was calculated, and so that's why it's based on that salary, and that salary doesn't change because that's when that change occurred.
So what happens in the case of, genuine increases that are not, in staff, whether because of increase in enrollment or just renegotiated contracts that don't keep pace with that 2011 staffing level? You're just out of luck?
You're out of luck.
Wow, okay.
So we've been working on the budget. We continue to work on the budget. We took a different approach this year, so we adjusted some of our numbers to make them more realistic, like our healthcare coverage. We accounted for the fact that we see typically a 3% reduction between the first look and the second look, and we incorporated some of those things into the budget when we originally presented it back in December. So although we're going to have some additional changes to the budget, they're not going to be as large as we have seen in the past. But we do believe that based on the Act 1 exceptions that were approved and utilizing the retirement escrow fund and some additional changes that we'll continue to work on, that we will be able to bring to the board in April a budget that is balanced or very close to balanced, with the exception of including any items for capital projects. So we will continue to work on it. We've been meeting as a group. Administrators met on Monday to talk about some things that we need them to do so that we can meet this week and early next week for just general brainstorming ideas on how we can close that gap. But we are very confident as a group that we will be able to do that and bring to you a budget that is, as I said, balanced or very close to being balanced.
And then we'll consider what those actions are, it sounds like.
Correct. We will be including in that budget that we'll be presenting in April, we'll be including the Act 1 exceptions. That doesn't mean that we will ultimately end up using them. However, we believe that it is in the best interest of the district to present the potential highest tax increase to a taxpayer as opposed to making that change when we approve the final. What we don't want to do is we don't want to present to taxpayers a preliminary budget that has an increase of 0.57 mils and then end up having an increase of 0.68 or something like that.
So will there be alternatives for us to consider? So if closing the gap uses the $600,000 that we just talked about of the approved exceptions versus closing the gap is using half of that plus these other reductions, are there going to be alternatives for us to consider? Since April is already pretty close, we were trying to have everything approved in May. It gives us 1 month, really, to debate, deliberate, whatever language you want to use. I just want to know how we're...
And the other piece, I mean, I appreciate that that's the direction in which your mind is going for the April conversation, but the conversation that we haven't had at all in this budget process is that we made a lot of changes last year, cutting back, and as I said last year, I wasn't totally comfortable with some of the changes that we made, and we've not, to my knowledge, maybe you guys had the conversation last month, had a substantive conversation about what the impact of some of those changes were. And, and yet anecdotally, I hear about a lot of bigger class sizes at the middle school. We've heard about a lot of bigger class sizes at the elementary school. I mean, I appreciate that you're talking about maybe closing the gap with further reductions, but we haven't had the conversation about what the impact of some of those actual changes were last year, and do we need to revisit putting some of them in place, knowing that this year we started off with a budget that assumed we wouldn't do that, we would just, status quo from last year. So when's that conversation happening?
Yeah, I'm fine to have the other side of that, sure.
Do we have a plan for that?
And do we need then, being that it is the 28th of March, do we need then to schedule at least 2 meetings next month?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I think the idea of probably having 2 meetings, having a meeting in finance to look at that, I think the administration's at a point too where we're looking for direction from the board on what you would like to see forward. In developing what we're going to call a maintenance budget, we looked at the maintenance budget, and the maintenance budget, had us $1.5 million over. Administratively, what Michelle was sharing is that we can come forward, we believe, and show you where we could make budget and cover that $1.5 million, including exceptions, including other pieces as well. So we could present that next month and share with the board. We could certainly put in place a description and a discussion about what changes happened last year, as well as a staffing report. One of the pieces we wanted to bring forward in April is also a staffing report of just here's where we are.
Based on enrollment.
Based on enrollment, based on staff, I mean, both. I mean, it is
Right.
Here's what we are, here's what our enrollment is, but here's what it is. And that discussion is as much about trying to get that discussion to begin so that we get comfortable doing that each year.
Right.
I mean, we want to each year be looking at, here are our numbers, here are all the bodies, here are all the seats, here's where, all the positions we have. So we want to have that discussion as well as a starting point for future years that we see that we're looking at this piece. But what I would want to know from the board is, are there options, as the administration could look to cover that and have those discussions on how we would balance it? Is the board looking for, okay, here's one option on how we can balance it, here's another option on how we can balance it? Is that what the board is looking for, or is that?
I think, it's hard to speak for the entire board without the entire board weighing in. However, at our last budget meeting when we were all together, I think there was some recognition that to make up for to get us out of the hole that we're in, we were going to have to make some hard decisions and use exceptions, whether fully or partially, don't know, but use exceptions to try and help to get us back onto a healthy track. How much of that, I don't know, but I guess from my perspective, I'd at least like to have a couple of options to consider so that we're not just walking in and saying, okay, well, here's the budget, and this is the only way we have to think about closing the gap. Do I personally want you to spend a boatload of time figuring out how to, find another $600,000 so we don't have to use exceptions? I don't think that's the will of the board. I wouldn't ask you to do that.
Well, I also think that, there's an important exception here, and that's we're going to see a balanced budget, hopefully, or close to it, except capital. So
the capital piece is
the capital
huge.
piece is going to be important anyway. So at some level, the discussion is going to end up, I think, moving away from the operating because they can get us to closure. But what do we do here about the capital problem? Do we, are we going to finance it, or are we going to self-fund it, or what are we going to do there? That, to me, is really going to be the focus of this particular piece, because I think your question is really an important one.
I do too.
But I think that Ken's desire to put in place some regular reporting out on staffing will go a long way toward helping us sort of contextually understand all the things that we've done. And, I think last year it was hard because I think we were a bit, we were looking at this and, this teacher quit and or retired, and we had this opportunity to, slim some up. But I think this will give us a much better opportunity to see the whole thing and how it looks from that perspective. And I think that should answer a lot of our questions. But I think capital is going to be where the action is.
Yes, and it's funny because, I feel more concerned about the thing that I mentioned and less concerned about capital, mostly because, and I think we view this differently, but that's okay. We continue to not need to ultimately spend down the fund balance that we even budget to spend down. That has been the practice the last few years. With the exception of the Wayne and the Ithan construction, that was a very large project. Are there other ways in which we intended to use fund balance? We didn't ultimately end up needing to use all of it. So I feel a little bit more comfortable about the self-funding of the capital projects, but I know that that's going to be a conversation at the whole board level, and I agree with you on that. I also don't want to find us in a position where we go years without dealing with some capital issues, and all of a sudden we have a huge bill. So I want us to strike the balance of, not spending down too much, not using too much in capital, but also not deferring some maintenance and being caught a number of years down. It was a big deal when we brought in that plan to replace buses on an ongoing basis. They didn't do that for a long time, and when they did, it was an important shift. But so a second meeting is going to, I think, help address this.
Okay,
is where I think we're going with that.
But I do think, though, I think to Susan's point, I think by having the systematic view of our staffing versus our enrollment in a way that is not budget driven. That it's just the way the operation of the business needs to work, and the budget needs to support the operation, not the other way around, because we were dealing with it the other way around last year, which may have made us make some decisions that perhaps were not the best decisions. So now you'll come to us with it in that other way, and hopefully that'll address some of the questions in looping back to what the impact was from last year's budgetary decisions.
But at the same time, we should be able to present to the public just on an education level, to educate them, not on a level, here's what we're going to do, but, a budget of, if we don't take the exceptions, this is what it means. Our staffing is going to drop to this.
The
which means your
alternatives,
right, the
yes.
alternatives. If you don't
Yes.
take the exceptions, the budget's going to be this. Your class sizes are going to go up by that because staffing is going to drop by that. So that people say, well, why'd you have to take these exceptions? What are you, like 30 kids in the
Yes.
class? That for that education piece.
I totally agree.
So,
Yeah.
and then the capital,
Is that okay?
to the point of capital, I'm kind of in the middle of that. Like, we do have a capital fund because some of the things we're looking at, are
Clearly capital.
yeah, clearly, but operational capital stuff, the maintenance, ongoing maintenance, military. What is military called? Operations and maintenance budget. I mean, that's
And that's
a
not
capital
included
fund,
in our,
right.
and
That-
that's
yeah,
not included in our
and that's a
regular
big
operational
piece.
budget, which is another
Yeah.
whole
So
discussion.
like you guys are saying,
That's a
I think
problem.
that's going to be where the
Yep. Okay, cool. So I think, do you have enough direction then in terms of what to bring back? And for this group, I guess I'm not able to do it here on the fly, but we'll post around some emails to people in terms of picking another date to meet and just firm up on what our 2 meetings will be for this month.
well, I've written every Tuesday off until my
Yeah.
term's up.
And
I just have to figure out what country I'm going to be in for
and I would just say,
month.
based on that, there could be a potential for, maybe we could look at, since curriculum committee and finance committee meet on the same night, maybe there could be some,
a joint.
maybe, yeah, well, I'm looking for Maureen, she was here, but
Yeah.
before I take away time there, but maybe we could, because some of the pieces
Yeah,
we're
they
looking
are.
at is staffing,
Yeah.
cuts across, and we could maybe do a little bit of a joint, and then decide after that meeting whether there needs to be an additional budget hearing as well. We could,
Okay.
but we'll throw out some dates.
I feel like we used to have in April a budget meeting. I feel like we used to have a meeting of the board around April in years past. I feel like we
We
used to
have.
do that. We did like a December one, a budget workshop. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's budget workshop.
So, maybe that's all we're really talking about.
Well, there's 2 more people make up the curriculum committee, so that makes us a majority anyhow, so it may as well be a meeting of the whole.
That's what I was suggesting,
Yeah.
it would be a meeting of the whole if we did it that way.
Okay, that's it on the budget for the moment. Okay? So the next and the last item on our agenda for the evening was an update on the substitute teacher situation. And I know that we had asked for a couple of changes. Todd, welcome back. I'm welcoming you, but you can welcome me. Same. Not sure if you had a chance to get caught up on where we had left it last month in our discussion, since you were not able to attend. And what are we looking at this month?
I think the changes were made that Michelle talked to me about previously. Basically, if we're looking at the first page, you'll see building summary for February of 2017 across the entire district would be the first page, which you probably are more interested in the back pages. The fill rate for February was almost 73%. The fill rate for the previous year was 67%, and I'm on page 3. It's a blue chart with red bars. If you notice, we did go up in percentage, which is good considering we added almost 300 absences in February compared to the previous February. Well, if you look at the last page, it'll show you absences by category, and I broke them down into 5 categories. That is leave or FMLA, which they are entitled to per federal law, and then you have the personal days that are in there, and the yellow bar is the illness. So if you look at the high school, we had 96 illness, middle school was 89 illness, and West was 65, and the other 2 buildings were in the 40s.
The percentages, though, is so, you could say, wow, the absences at the high school are so huge, except that it's a much bigger school.
Absolutely. They
So
have a
the
bigger
percent
staff.
of absences, my sense is that our percent of absences is certainly larger this year than in years past.
Correct. I can, if the
And that's
committee would
what
like that, I could
that's
do
what I'm trying to get a handle
building
on.
percentages per staff.
Well, and I think that's what we had asked for, was like to get some sort of perspective
Like,
to this
why?
number. So 96 illnesses, we take the high school, 96 illness days. 96 is not 96 people, it's
No,
96 days.
96 days in the days of
Working
work.
days of all of the staff members
Correct,
was a total of
103
96.
staff, I believe.
So the question I think we talked about last month was the possibility of just putting a total number of people, or if percentage is another way of doing it, percentage of staff that 96 days, because that could be that could be 4 people out.
Correct.
Well, I guess it really wouldn't,
Would you
because that
like
push you over
the
the-
number of staff times the number of workdays to see there are X
Yeah.
number of workdays in
Yes.
the month?
Yeah, 100% equals staff times days, and then absences is the numerator over that denominator.
I think I'm asking a different question.
I'm not
Because
asking
I
that
think I'm
either, yeah.
asking kind of, is there something going on within our organization that's causing our absenteeism to increase? Is there a dynamic going on? Is it just bad luck? Has it been a strain of flu? Is there something going on that now? So, and then to counteract that, because what I can look at and say, your fill rate was much better this year versus last, which is fabulous. And so I would say, I think that the building substitute that you enacted is making a difference.
Is it?
And we are increasing, and it is making a difference. And I actually just had a meeting today with Source for Teachers that they're going to put another blitz out, and we're going to actually put signs, almost like yard signs, in our schools to have people apply that if they want to do the guest teacher or regular substituting, to get a more visible approach. I know they've been doing some things, but it's not necessarily visible unless your inner buildings are looking at our website.
Well, you
So
know,
we're
you
gonna try
know
to
how the
do-
fireworks advertise at the corner of 30 and King of Prussia? You know?
Well, I know they advertise down at the beach with the
I've
flags
seen
behind
that,
the planes.
actually. I saw that last
But-
year.
So we're going to try to do some visible within the district to get some people, and they're working on those signs.
But
We're hoping to have those.
back
in a
to the
week or so.
questions at hand, though, I actually would like both. I mean, I'm curious as to the, 100 teachers times 20 workdays, and the number of teachers who called in sick, divided into that per building, so we know. Because, I mean, you have 48 days out at Ithan. I know Ithan, I don't know it off the top of my head, but I know Ithan's a lot smaller than the high school. But, and then, to Susan's point, did the high school have was it shot flu with the bird flu, or were they just, sick of working?
I can't tell you.
Well, you can look at this chart with the red over yellow, the absence summary. I mean, that tells you that there's something big is happening. It doesn't tell you what, it tells you that.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can quantify for us. I mean, I don't know, because, I mean, if
I mean,
they're
I
just calling
can-
sick, I mean.
I can talk to the building administrators, but as far as the increase in absences due to illness, that's a little difficult because we don't ask for doctor's notes unless it's 3 consecutive days. And without talking to somebody and potentially violating their HIPAA.
No, I'm not. I'm asking
Right.
for executive level theme. Is there a theme going on? The other question I wanted to ask, it's tangentially related to this, which is in the proposed new calendar that we're going to be looking at in the board meeting, where we've eliminated many half days, but we're still keeping professional development. You're planning to deal with the professional development with substitutes? Is that the plan next year?
Well, if it's a half day, the second part of the day will be the professional
We've
development.
eliminated half days all over the place in next
But we
year's
didn't
calendar.
have them previously, so just for clarity, the calendar, we eliminated half-days long time ago. The presented calendar had a bunch of half-days in it. We didn't really change the way we do our operation. So when we do a professional day and the students are out of the building, you don't need substitutes.
Correct, when the students are out of the building. If the curriculum department, and I would defer to Maureen, if the curriculum department has a training that happens during the day during a student day, what we try to do is get enough subs, and they've been great this year that they've had to do the hard thing and cancel some trainings because we didn't have enough subs to cover. But what we'll try to do is she may do a half-day training and do some teachers in the AM, some teachers in the PM, but we would use the same sub the entire day because it's always harder to get a half-day sub.
Right, because what I don't want to see us happen is ending up having to forego professional development.
Right.
That's the piece I'm trying to be mindful of, not foregoing professional development, recognizing that the substitute piece is a component of that depending on how we're giving the professional development. Anyway, all right, thank you.
So maybe that's another curriculum discussion then, in terms of, I know you've given us professional development, and maybe it's just because I don't have it here visually in front of me to do the mind check on that, but looking at that calendar, of the 10 incremental teacher days, and, I know there's more than just teachers, but of the incremental 10 days over students 181, teachers are 191, that's 10 days. Of those 10 days, 8 of them are set aside as professional development type days. Now, one might be how you use them, is up to the district, and that's, I guess, the piece that I would like to see. Because if there's 8 days, I know 5 are in the beginning, and there's a few scattered throughout, why are we needing to pull teachers out of classrooms in the middle of a school day? I'd like to understand that better. I know you've given it to us, but I'd like to understand it better yet again. And I know there are some purposes where we have to do that, but yeah.
So one of the things we were working on today is our professional development theme calendar for next year, and I have shown that to you before, but I can show you the one for next year. And what we try to do is we try to identify the specific professional development that involves the largest numbers of teachers and take care of those on the full day professional development days when we have everyone. The challenge with a full day professional development day is when you have 360 teachers, you can only work with so many people at a time. So there are some things that need to be specifically addressed with small groups of teachers. For instance, if the science department at the high school is learning how to use probes for AP environmental science, we might need to pull 4 teachers or 6 teachers. The other thing is we're trying to be closer aligned to best practice with professional development. So part 1 of professional development, as you saw with Math in Focus, is let's all sit in a training and learn about the manuals and the pieces and the components and things like that. But then part 2 is the demo lessons and the breakout sessions and the coaching that happens in the classroom. So we do have more of the professional development happening closer to the classroom. So for instance, tomorrow we have a handful of subs going to the middle school, and middle school teachers will be coming out for blocks of time, and they will be observing the Math in Focus trainers actually teaching the lessons that they would normally teach in an actual middle school classroom and debriefing. So that would be an example of a situation where we would need, 4 or 5 substitutes that, as Todd mentioned, float around for the day and work on those kinds of things.
But you know that 3 months in advance.
Oh, yeah, we do. And we have a calendar in the curriculum office. It's old school whiteboard, and we have the date of every day in the school year on it. And if someone wants to pull a group of teachers for something like that, you check the calendar and make sure that there isn't something else going on that day, some type of a competing activity.
And that cycle will ebb and flow. I mean, putting in a new math program,
Yes.
I would imagine, dictates a great deal more professional development in that given year than maybe, year 2 or year 3, but that initial year is going to really dictate probably more professional development.
Correct. And the further you get into the implementation of a program, the closer the professional development should get to the actual teacher level and the actual classroom level, which is where our coaches come into play, which is where these model lessons come into play. I was looking at language arts for next year. Our English teachers are interested in doing some revamping of some of our high school courses, as an offshoot of our language arts audit. And on the calendar for next year, we have 2 professional development days, which will allow them some time to do that work. But they also want to do some collaborating with some post-secondary higher ed folks, and that will likely involve 2 or 3 teachers, maybe 1 teacher leaving for a half day here and there to participate in something like that.
So if I look at the first page that's here, and it's the building summary for the month of February, and I am looking at, knowing right now that we've heavy concentration on professional development at the elementary level, and knowing that typically substitutes are not, we're getting substitutes that are either high school specific or elementary specific because of their certifications, right? So they're not necessarily transferable easily. So it would lead me, in looking at this, to say that at least for now, in the month of February, we didn't have, I can see a spike here going on at Wayne Elementary School. Obviously, that spike looks like it's related to the number of, it equates to the number of subs that were actually needed, too, if you look at the delta between them. Are we having problems filling substitutes at the different levels? Is the high school harder to fill than the elementary school? Is there anything else that we're doing at the elementary school that makes that easier or minimizes that? Just trying to understand if I look at the unfilled rates.
I don't know if one is easier to fill than the other. I can tell you that even though the curriculum department contacts the staff and they put their absences in, it's a matter of how many other staff call out that given day, and then the decision has to be made: are we covering a classroom, or are we sending them to training? So it really depends on the time of the year and the month. Sometimes it's harder to find elementary, sometimes it's harder to find secondary. If I would have to say, typically your secondary has a little bit more unfilled than your elementary. If without even looking at this, and I'm guessing
Well, you got 50% fill rate at the high school.
Right. So you've got that's the issue, and we have more building subs up there. But if you look at the 3 elementaries, and they each have 2, so they have 6 in the elementary, but we only have 4 at the secondary. So there's things that I'm looking at and tweaking that we would come back for recommendations for next year to start the year. But we're trying different things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have some teachers that are out for a period of time with a doctor's note, and then we're hoping they come back, and then they come back with a new doctor's note that extends it another 2 weeks, and then we're expecting them back, and then because they have the ability to use that leave, it's kind of a drag on, and it's a little harder to find substitutes when you do that compared to when somebody's saying, I'm going to be out 8 weeks, and we can lock somebody in knowing they're going to report every day for 8 weeks.
I don't want to assume. Do you guys coordinate when you're going to have the professional development days with getting the building subs there? So, you know, you're going to pull out half a dozen teachers or whatnot, you know, from first 3.5 hours of the day, and then a different half dozen of teachers. I mean, you're coordinating with Todd to get a sub there all day at whatever school building that is.
Well, what the curriculum department does is they'll inform the teacher when it's happening, and then the teacher puts that absence in there. The way we use building subs is not what people think. They're not the first line of fill-ins.
No, but I mean, I was just saying, like, do you or should you, like, if you know you're going to pull a half dozen teachers out in the morning and half dozen teachers out in the afternoon, instead of relying on those teachers to go into the system and say, you know, we're not going to be here for half of the day, should Maureen go to you and say, like, I'm pulling these guys out, so we need one person to cover?
And we do actually, we
you know?
go right to HR periodically, maybe a month or so, a month and a half in advance, and we say, here's what's coming up for January. We need 12 subs on February 9th. We actually, for professional development purposes, for the model lessons, I mean, we had an excellent fill rate for February. But if it occurs that we're having a professional development activity, some type of vertical team meeting or the model lessons, and there's not enough coverage in the building, those teachers go back to cover their own classrooms, and then we make some accommodations during the day. Sometimes we just bring them in during lunch so they can at least be part of the session. But we've had excellent coverage the last 4 to 5 weeks for the model lessons. It's gone well.
And what we do is when we're notified, then Deb Cantino, who handles this for the most part, she'll go in and check if those teachers have put in for their absences yet, and if not, she may end up contacting them and say, you know, just a little reminder, or, like I said, curriculum has been a great help as well, reminding their teachers.
So to Susan Stern's earlier question then, or observation, that having some sort of a narrative, you know, because clearly you look at January, you look at February, and you see nearly double from 15, 16 to 17 in both cases. Now, I know there was a nasty bug going around, or 2 or 3. Is that really what accounted for this? It would just be helpful to have that narrative, which I think Susan was asking for.
What we'll do is I'll try to see if we can go back that far and try to break it out in these 5 categories that we can look at. You know, example, there was 96 illness days at the high school. We'll try to go back to previous years and see if we can pull the same data, if it's still in the system, that we can compare. You know, did the high school have 30 absences last year? Now they're at 96. Is that something that you would feel would be beneficial?
Yeah.
To see if it is an illness thing or something else?
I think the question you're raising is we don't know.
You
Based
didn't-
on previous year's data, we don't know if it's personal day leaves or school business.
Correct.
We don't have that breakdown.
We may be able to go back and get that information, but I can't say yes, we can right now.
So my take on that is I would prefer not to spend time doing that. I don't know that it's going to help you a lot. I don't know it's going to help us a lot. But it would help us at least to say, there was a huge bug that was going around the high school, and, half of these people were out for the 2 or 3 days that, that bug, was known to have, what I mean? Just some sort of narrative on it so that we understand it. I think the going backwards thing, I'd rather build forward than spend a lot of time
I agree, Patty.
looking back.
Yeah, it was more just anecdotally, is there something going on? That's all.
I will try to ask building administration and find out for March's report if we notice there's a big spike.
And is there something we can do if there is something going on, is there something we can or should be doing as a district? I mean, if there's a spike in bugs, is there something we could be doing as a district or sanitizing air, and not to say you guys aren't doing that, but is there something our district can be doing to help support our professional, from a facility standpoint or professionally, to help support our own cause here of having the healthiest staff we can have so that absenteeism isn't an excessive issue given teacher shortages and all this. I'm kind of more asking it from can we do something to help ourselves?
Wait and see for everyone.
Yeah, well, there you go.
And then I guess it would just go unspoken, but I'll say it just for clarity. I trust that the building principals are paying attention to unusual events of abuse by
I believe they are.
individuals.
Maureen did issue me a name previously that I've been watching that she had concerns with. So I'm trying to develop a pattern, if there is, that we can address that.
Okay, but the building principals should be doing that as a
And I'll-
part of their daily business, right?
Right, and I will remind them as well.
Okay. All right, cool. Okay. Does anybody have anything else? Anything from your side? We're good. Thank you.